Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carter.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carter. Guys, it's great to be here. It's 9 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Saturday, November 15th. Man, the days go by so quick. I'm telling you. And, well, didn't the Bible say that the days would go by really quick during the end of days? Yeah, that's what it is. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Dragon's Broker, how the Dent family and the Breakspeares delivered China to Rome. We're going to put this to bed. Now, most don't understand about the whole Breakspeare and the Orsini ordeal, and it's been my responsibility to make sure you guys understand who did what, when, and why, right? Because there's not a lot of information about the Breakspeare family, but the Breakspeare family were the first British papal pope ever. And that made a difference because obviously Britain would want their own pope in there to, control people. And that's kind of what we're trying to figure out as we go through all of this mystery. And the mystery has been, we've heard it was the Breakspeares and Orsinis, and we found plenty of evidence that the Orsinis were there, but we have not found enough evidence about the Breakspeare family, and I have. So I'm putting it to bed. It was the Breakspeares with help of the Medici family and others, but the Breakspeares evidently transferred their power over to China. And of course, I'm having problems with the internet again because, well, that's just what happens when you uncover the beast system. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior, we've got Royal Rumble, says, "What's up, Pastor? What's up, warriors? Hope everyone is doing well. Remember, the Lord loves all of us, even without our faults. He accepts us and loves each and every single one of us. Amen and amen and amen." I believe that 100%. And says, even without our faults, amen. And number two warrior is Boots, after stating, "Time for another great show, warriors. Hello, Pastor James of the airwaves and creator of Elite Potion. Great product. I've tried it." Yes, you have. Thank you, Boots, for doing that. And he says, "Hi, warriors and new listeners. If you could please hit that thumbs up button, that'd be great." Yeah, if you do, that'll help me out a lot. And number three warrior is Scorpion, saying, "Hey guys, hope all is well, working but present. Amen. Thank you very much for being here, my friend." And number 5 warrior is Holland, saying, "Sup warriors and James, nice to be here." Followed by Royal Rumble, stating, "I'm at work too, my man. Love being able to listen to the show even at work." Well, it's great to be able to do a show and have others listening to it. I appreciate that very much. All right, guys, let's get into shitty breaking news. Because we can.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carter, offering his shitty opinion.
Well, I can't help it. It is my opinion. Marjorie Taylor Greene says she's had warnings for my safety after posts by Trump. No. She's not going anywhere. She probably is being blackmailed. Now, she's the only one that's actually taken more of a step than any others. I'll give her credit for trying to expose the truth. But until Marjorie Taylor Greene tells everyone that the Federal Reserve is not federal, that it's owned by 12 private banks, half of them are in Europe, half of them are in America, and they're the ones that print our money and profit off of it. Until she comes out and says that, and she comes out and says we need to remove that and go back to a dollar that's backed by the people, not backed by central banks. Basically, if Marjorie Taylor Greene would say we need a bill to get rid of the central bank so we can go back to sound money that America is promised as far as in the Constitution. But will that ever happen? Because this has happened 3 times now. The American people finally figure out, oh my God, the central banks have controlled us from across the ocean. Yeah, they have 3 times in America. We filed for bankruptcy 3 times because, well, they continue to sneak their way in. And that's history. And the only way to get rid of them is not by killing all of the royals, not by killing all of the dynasties or the billionaires. The only way to get rid of this is to kill greed itself. And how are you going to kill greed? Well, you can't, because there's a devil out there that's going to make sure that greed stays, because it's a big part of his game plan. U.S. immigration crackdown arrests underway in Charlotte, North Carolina. Who gives a shit? Trump has suggested he's made a decision on Venezuela military operation. Well, what's he going to do? Do we have any details about what they plan on doing? I mean, if America goes in the country and starts blowing shit up, is that not an act of war? So we'll have to see what China does, because you see, China has full control over the infrastructure, okay? The infrastructure of Venezuela. And this happened under Trump's watch. It did. And it happened under Obama's watch. It did. And it happened even under Bush. And they all knew that Venezuela was going to gain power through China through giving them their resources, which is oil. And Trump is down there basically stating, no more China. We're getting you out of there. And his whole army surrounding Venezuela is basically saying this: if you don't kick out China, we're going to blow your shit up. That's what he's doing. He's, puffing up his feathers surrounding Venezuela, saying, oh, you don't know what we can do to you. We've got so many cool weapons that we've been wanting to use. And will he do it? Why not? It's the Trump way, right? They're all warmongers, okay? Trump and his administration, they need to kill as many people as they possibly can, because that's how you control the world. The more breadth you have under your own registry, the more power you have over others. This is why China and the Li family and the Orsini family fight against each other through killing. And the more they kill, the more power they get. The Li family, they were so behind on power. Okay, we're talking about power from the principalities, that they had to execute 1 billion of their own people to gain enough power to get BRICS going. And this is why BRICS has 30% control over the world. 30%, meaning they control 30% of all currencies going back and forth between banks. And that can't happen under the Federal Reserve Orsini board, because they have been the ones that have been in control for the past 250 years. But the Orsinis are losing it because nobody wants war anymore. So they got to find a new way to kill people. And the new way they thought was going to be medical, where they inject everyone with a shot that'll kill. Well, they fucked up because they didn't realize how great that God has made the body, and it just hasn't done what they wanted. Because their game plan was to kill billions under the COVID scare, and it did not work. So, hey, that's just what it is. So now they got to figure out another way to kill people. And it's on the drawing board. They're figuring out. They've got think tanks, lawyers, corporations all pushing to kill people. Just as the Georgia Guidestones stated before they broke it all down when we started to talk about it. But the Georgia Guidestones basically stated they want to maintain humanity at 500 million. That's their goal. That's what Lucifer wants. He doesn't want any more than that, okay? And they also want to change all of you into androgynous drones that just work and dig for them, for the rich. And that's not what I'm interested in. And this is why I'm exposing all their bullshit. Atmospheric river hit Southern California. Last year it hit Northern California. So just, how did it get to Southern California? Well, I don't know. Geoengineering, weather modification, pretty simple when you have the machinery. And the machinery, if you go look at the patents, they've been out there for quite some time. So atmospheric rain, it's going to always hit California. Probably it's Trump and his team just nailing them, saying, if you don't get out of China and start working with the United States, because you're commies, If you don't get out of working with China, we're just going to destroy your freaking country. And that's what California really is. They think of themselves as their own country. And they've made all kinds of deals with China, okay? And they've been turning away on all the tariffs and letting all of this shipment come in from China and not charging them for it. And Trump's getting pissed. This is why he wants to send the reserves, the Army reserves, in order to crack down on the ports to get the money that is supposed to be coming through tariffs. That was the goal. Is it backfiring? Well, the blue states under control of China, Russia, and the Democratic National Committee, well, they're all under the idea that Trump is Hitler, so they're going to fight it off as long as they can unless Trump takes the military and wipes them all out. Will that happen? I don't know. It's all about optics because nobody knows exactly what's going on in the world today. They would be shocked if Trump, went after the Democrat National Committee because they're, under the American impression, are just other Americans. And that's the whole scam of it. So it leaves his hands tied, and unless he grows a pussy, which he already has, he's not going to be able to do such a thing because he will always be remembered as the president that screwed everything up by attacking its own country. Well, he should be, if he was really for the American people, he should be telling everyone the truth that China has control of these blue states. If he doesn't say that and doesn't get the information out on the airwaves, then nobody's gonna know. So if you play by the elite game of hiding the truth on top of a false truth, on top of a false truth, on top of a false truth, you're never going to get the real story to the people. And this is the divide and conquer strategy that they're working with. And this is why I think that Trump is not a good guy. And he's still working for the bad guys. Regardless, no, he's not working for Russia. He's not working for China. He's working for the Orsini family. And the Orsini family have been the ones controlling the Federal Reserve. And ever since the Bush family brought in Chinese to come in and start buying up land and buying up companies and start messing around with our economy, well, then the Orsinis decided, well, we better do something. Well, that's on the Orsini clan's fault. They're the ones that let America die, okay? And that's what is happening. That's what you're witnessing before you. It's a dying country. And what happens to a dying country? Usually a civil war. Will a civil war come? We don't know, but it's more likely to happen before World War III. Trump buys at least $82 million in bonds since late August, disclosures show. So he's putting his own money into bonds to basically say, hey, the dollar's doing great. I'm buying bonds. Well, good luck with that. Let's see how long that takes. And that is breaking news. All right, we're going to go to a quick commercial. When we get back, we're going to be talking about the Dragon's Broker, how the Dent family and the Breakspeares delivered China to Rome.
Paying federal income tax is voluntary. So why has every person you know done it their entire lives? You were told it's the law, but the system was built on a lie hidden in plain sight that you are required by law to pay. The truth is, 98% of Americans don't owe income tax by law. Federal income tax is for federal employees. For everyone else, it's voluntary. You agreed to pay when you signed your first tax return, and you've been renewing that contract every year since. Sounds too good to be true? You're asking, why doesn't everyone know this? Because almost everyone signed before they were old enough to understand it. It's time to unlearn the lie and break free from IRS jurisdictions, protect your assets, and keep more of what you earn legally. Visit unincorporatedisassociations.com now and become tax-free.
I think you should. This is what we do. The unincorporated association is real, and this is what the billionaires, millionaires, and banks, when they set up their corporations, that's what they do. So they set themselves up either through a trust or through an unincorporated association. Now, 30 states nationwide allow for unincorporated associations, so it's totally legal. And it's tax-free. And the whole scam of the Federal Reserve and the IRS and all of them, demanding taxes and putting you in prison, it's because you signed. Yeah, you signed the agreement that you're going to pay that. And that's the problem. If you go to unincorporatedisassociations.com, you'll actually learn a few things about law and the Constitution and what's right and what's not right. And you could probably save yourself retirement if you do so. So I did it for Elite Potion. I think you guys should do it for your own personal finances because, hey, the country that you are living in is paying for genocide, okay? We've been the ones paying for the bombs. It's been our checks cutting the bombs they've been dropping over in Gaza, which killed countless, hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands, if not at least 1 million Gazans. And most of them were women, children, and senior citizens. So fuck you, Israel. I don't care. Yeah, I'm a Christian pastor, and I'll say that because you know what? It's being ran by the devil. Now, I don't say fuck you to God's land, but I say it to the leaders of Israel, the ones who are doing what the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and all of the big bankers what they want, and that is to bring in their Messiah because they really think that their Antichrist is going to come onto the scene and really make it. Well, this show is all about the truth, and what we have found out will blow your mind that, you know what? God is going to stop all that the moment someone finds the tablet of witness. Yeah. I'm also writing my fourth book. It is called The Stone That Speaks. And I do believe this is prophecy and something that is going to happen in the future. And all 4 of my books, a culmination, they're going to all basically give you an idea as to what is really going on in the world. And once I'm done with the 4th book, I may merge them all into one and basically call it, don't read this. I'm just an idiot author. Because, hey, people always want to do what they're told not to. Yeah, so we're going to do what we're told not to. That's what we do. All right, guys, let's get into it. So the Dragon's Broker, how the Dent family, Dent and Company, which is a British family, and that's a British accent, and Breakspeares delivered China to Rome. Yeah. So this is how China got their start, okay? They weren't a very rich country until the opium trade started there. Now, they tell the story of China's fall to opium as a tale of British greed, gunboats, smugglers, and silver. But behind the cannon smoke and merchant flags stood an older empire, right? One not marked by redcoats, but by robes. Yeah. Not ruled from London, but from Rome. And it wasn't merely Queen Victoria's signature that cracked open the gates of Canton. That's what they all think. Queen Victoria opened up Canton and China and got everything working for them. No, it was the invisible hand of a priesthood that had already entered through the back door of the Forbidden City, centuries before, disguised as stargazers and scientists and Jews. Now, this is the tale of 2 families here. The Dent family, which is the British merchant house that rose to wealth on the back of poppy smoke. And the Breakspeare family, the papal bloodline descended from the only English pope that silently authored the terms of spiritual war. Now, while the Dents dealt opium from Hong Kong and signed treaties at gunpoint, the Breakspeares navigated higher courts, embedding Rome's designs into British foreign policy, trade law, and the Jesuit economic web. Their connection was not always visible, but it was always deliberate. Now, when the Jesuits first entered China in the 16th century, and the Jesuits are a secret society agents. They're undercover agents, secret society agents, just like the CIA, MI6, and the Mossad, okay? But they're for the Vatican. And when they first entered China in the 16th century, they came not to conquer with steel, but to advise with knowledge. We come with information. We want to get you guys up in the real modern world. We want you all to have a piano. They seduced emperors with astronomy. We know more about the stars and what's going to happen than you do. They also flattered them with clocks. They handed them a working clock and said, this is a computer. And it just amazed the emperors. And they translated their own catechisms into the tongue of dragons. So it was Britain who went into China and decided to take it over. For a time, they almost succeeded in converting the whole empire, and not even by force, but through simple fascination, just like the Quakers did with the Native Americans when they traded major plots of land for trinkets, little brass trinkets, which they've never seen before because the Native Americans didn't know much about smelting metal. And they traded like their land, their inheritance for trinkets, jewelry and keychains. But when the tides turned and the Qing dynasty, spelled Qing, rejected their Western gospel, Rome turned to a different strategy. Commerce, guns, debt, families. Now, Dent and Company became the merchant missionaries. They baptized China in addiction, not holy water. And as the East India Company collapsed, these private families, shielded by treaties and backstopped by Catholic banking syndicates, stepped in to finish the job. Through Hong Kong, through the Treaty of Nanking, and through countless civilizing enterprises, China was chained not only to Britain, but to the Jesuit Venetian machine that controlled her shadow. That sucks. The Breakspeares, working through ecclesiastical circuits and the elite legal trusts, they ensured that this was no mere economic conquest. They ensured that it was theological. We're trying to do the Lord's work. Every crate of opium was a counterfeit Eucharist. Every Hong Kong charter was a rewritten catechism. And the dragon did not bow to the cross. It was lured, drugged up, bound, and offered as tribute. Not to Jesus Christ, but to the counterfeit throne Rome had polished for centuries. And now, as China rises once more, not as a sovereign empire, but as a managed dragon within a globalist stable, we see the fruits of that long-forgotten alliance. Dent, the company and the family, laid the chains. Breakspeare wrote the laws. Rome counted the coins. And China, she was made to forget. Until now. This is the Jesuit map that opened the gates of the dragon. Now, before the opium, before the treaties, before the gunboats forced open the ports of Canton, there was a map. It was not drawn by Chinese hands, nor commissioned by any emperor, but by the Jesuits. Cloaked as missionaries and scholars, men like Matteo Ricci entered the heart of China in the late 1500s, bearing not only the Latin gospel, but astronomy charts, mechanical clocks, and a strategy of seduction. The Jesuit plan was really simple. Win the minds of the elite over there, and the soul of the empire would follow them. Ricci's world map, Kunyu Wangua Quantu, or Map of the 10,000 Countries of the Earth, it was printed in Chinese in 1602. It was not geographical. It was actually psychological. It placed China near the center, but subtly displaced it from spiritual authority. It elevated Europe as the realm of advanced science, celestial knowledge, and divine revelation. Through astronomy and calendar reform, the Jesuits were allowed to serve the emperor directly, earning prestige, trust, and dangerous proximity to the mandate of heaven. But beneath the surface of the scientific diplomacy was the hidden agenda of the Counter-Reformation. These missionaries were not Protestant mercenaries or imperial scouts. They were agents of Rome's grand design to spiritually reconquer the East. While Catholicism was fracturing in Europe, the Jesuits sought new domain in the Orient, hoping to replace Confucian harmony with papal order. The Jesuits understood what few did at that time, that empires fall not only by sword, but by reorientation of memory. They didn't just seek converts. Choose Jesus. They sought to overwrite Chinese cosmology itself. The calendar, the hierarchy of spirits, the structure of filial piety. Every pillar of Chinese society was gently reinterpreted under Rome's esoteric theology, or we could just call it Satanism. But when the Qing dynasty court eventually resisted the full imposition of Roman doctrine, rejecting the exclusivity of Jesus Christ and refusing to outlaw ancestor veneration, well, Rome retaliated. The rights controversy of the 1700s severed ties, and the Pope banned syncretic rituals that had been Rome's entry point. The Jesuits were recalled, and China closed its gates. Should have kept them closed, because it wasn't forever. Royal Rumble says, Pastor, are the Breakspeares Li family the same people in the Min and Han dynasties? I know the Ming and Han dynasties are offshoots of the Khazars. Yes and no. Yes, that the Li family are parts of the ancient dynasties, but they're scattered, and it's a mix between English and Chinese. And in order for them to keep it Chinese but be under the control of Britain, they had to raise people from childhood who were Chinese up until adults and put them into places of higher power where they would secretly be reporting information to Britain for the inside of China. These became the mafias or the white dragon, black dragon societies in China who gained so much power and wealth from Britain and through their tactics of what mafias do, destroying cities and controlling cities by making the cities pay them their due. Exactly what the British mandate has always been. You see, Italy in mafias, it didn't all start and originate from that. All of that kind of control and ruthless power came from Germany. In fact, it wasn't even Germany then, it was called Austria. And Austria had 4 families that were ruthless beyond recognition. And they controlled Europe through mafias. So mafias aren't anything that is new when it comes to China now and Europe. But as far as the Min and Han dynasties, the Ming and Han dynasties, part of their families merged through marriage with the Dent families and the Breakspeare families in order to gain the signatures of the breath that was taken by the other families to get China power. Hope that answers your question. So China closed its gates to Britain because they figured out they were being manipulated. Unfortunately for the Native Americans, it was too late. The Quakers kicked their ass. But it wasn't for forever, because the fall of the Jesuits in China did not end Rome's ambitions. They just shifted them. They knew what they were doing. From missionary to merchant, from maps to money, the next invasion would not come from the Vatican, but from British ships. And as the 19th century dawned, new families were chosen to continue the conquest. The opium lords of London and the noble families of Rome would forge a silent alliance. Silence. Among them, the Dents and the Breakspeares. Now, after the Jesuit expulsion and the waning influence of Rome in the East, a new kind of envoy arrived. It wasn't cloaked in robes, but in ledgers and sails. And these were the merchant princes of the British Empire. And among them, the name rose above the rest in the southern parts of China, which is Dent and Company. Founded in Canton, or Guangzhou, in the early 1800s by Thomas Dent, the firm quickly became one of the most powerful opium traders in Asia. Dent was no mere businessman. He was the vanguard of a new ecclesiastical commerce, the fusion of trade and throne, prophet and prophecy. Jesus comes with opium. With links to powerful banking interests in London and aristocratic ties to both Masonic lodges and Catholic orders, the Dent family emerged as a crucial node in the imperial economic machine. But their ascendancy wasn't accidental. It was all orchestrated by the Jesuits. The Breakspeare family, long associated with papal lineage, like with Nicholas Breakspeare, Pope Adrian IV, being the only English pope in history, had deep roots in ecclesial diplomacy. Meaning he had diplomacy in China. That was agreements that the Pope at that time made with China, and China honored, and they both honored their agreements. And that needed to be used by the Jesuits. But as the spiritual power of Rome began to mask itself in political neutrality, its agents flowed into finance, law, and overseas trade, embedding influence in families that could carry both Protestant appearance and Catholic allegiance. The Dent Breakspeare axis represents one of the clearest examples of this hybrid power. British by birth, Roman by spirit. That's how they fooled the Chinese. We come with Jesus. In Canton, Dent and Company operated at the very heart of the opium triangle, trafficking Bengalese opium into China through a fragile balance of bribery and bombardment. But behind their trade routes lay a more ancient blueprint, one reminiscent of the Venetian Jesuit banking model. Extract resources, destabilize culture, offer Western order as the solution. Hey, that sounds like America. Where do they get that from? The Dents didn't merely sell opium, they destabilized the Qing dynasty morale order. The narcotic was a weapon cloaked as a commodity. Just as the Jesuits once sought to rewrite the Confucian calendar, Dent and Company sought to fog the Confucian mind. And the results were catastrophic. Major addiction, inflation in China, and internal decay. China, who was once proud and ancient, was being hollowed from the inside out. Because they let them. But here's a hidden layer. The Dent enterprise served as the silent executor of unfinished Jesuit policy. Their corporate structure mirrored Venetian guild logic. Their offshore protections were modeled after Roman ecclesiastical immunity. You know, we're coming in the name of Jesus. We're going to make sure these opium trades are going smooth. and their partnerships, most notably with Jardine Matheson and links to the City of London, suggested a priesthood of finance, not unlike the priesthood of old. Just as the Jesuits once guided emperors through astronomical knowledge, Dent and Company guided them into debt and dependence. As British gunboats enforced the terms of the Treaty of Nanking, it was Dent and Company that profited from the ashes. Hong Kong was handed over to Britain. The ports were opened to Britain, and a gateway was reestablished, not for the missionaries of Jesus, but for the global technocrats. The Jesuit vision had been restructured, and the map had become a ledger. They spoke it into existence by forcing China with their big boats and guns. When the smoke cleared after the First Opium War, Britain's spoils were not just financial, they were geographic. The secession of Hong Kong in 1842 marked a turning point in China's spiritual and commercial sovereignty. But behind this imperial gain stood a deeper force, one that viewed geography not merely as territory, but as spiritual jurisdiction. For the Vatican and its ancient mercantile arms, Hong Kong was not a colony, it was a reclamation. Now, the Jesuits expelled from China in the 1700s after the clashing with both the Vatican hierarchy and Chinese Confucian officials had long nurtured a vision of return, but not through pulpits and Jesus, but through the ports. Their original mission centered around Matteo Ricci's delicate court diplomacy. Well, it faltered, but their financial blueprint remained. And that blueprint, perfected in Venice and revived by their successors in banking dynasties, required new vessels, both metaphorically and literally. Dent and Company, deeply entrenched in Hong Kong's early commercial government, became a cornerstone of this structure. Through their entwinement with Jardine Matheson and later with the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, they helped establish a financial infrastructure that mirrored the old Jesuit networks of influence, only now masked in colonial legality. The port was Roman, but not in name, but in function, a point of control, of conversion, of extraction. Just like what China did to Venezuela. Now consider the timing here. The Treaty of Nanking, 1842, and the founding of Hong Kong coincided with the reemergence of ultra-monetist Catholic power under Pope Gregory XVI and then Pope Pius XIV. I'm sorry, not the 14th, but the 9th. An era obsessed with reclaiming dominion over lost territories, not by sword, but stealth. While Protestant Britain claimed Hong Kong under Queen and Parliament, the spiritual undercurrent flowed toward Rome via a network of Catholic sympathetic aristocrats, bankers, and secret societies. Enter the Breakspeare thread. Though largely silent in name, their role as high-level intermediaries between the Vatican and British aristocracy has long been suspected. Their historical alignment with covert diplomacy, their historical alignment with that and ecclesiastical laws and land management suggests that their fingerprints are not only to be found in charters, but in convenings through quiet agreements between crown proxies and Vatican agents. And in the reshaping of Hong Kong's education system, judiciary, and banking protocols, one can observe the architecture of Rome without seeing its builders. By 1850, Hong Kong had become more than a trade hub. It was a neutral zone between East and West, where Jesuit banking met Protestant empire, and where Chinese identity was slowly converted, not to Christianity, but to global finance. And the opium destroyed the body. The legal treaties neutered the will. But it was the port itself, Canton, a hybrid city of East and West that acted as the ultimate altar, where the dragon was baptized not into liberty, but servitude to the crown. Now, Rome had lost China once through overreach. It would not make that same mistake again. This time, it returned through banks and brokers. You know, loaning interest rate money, or paper dollars, or IOUs instead of actual physical gold. While British textbooks cast the Dent family as mere opium traders, we're just drug dealers, turned respectable merchants, my ass, the deeper story shows that they were spiritual agents of empire. Brokers between commerce and conquest, masking an older mission beneath the sails of trade. The Dent name is not incidental. It appears in Canton, Hong Kong, London, and through marriage and partnerships, tracing into the banking dynasties and ecclesiastical networks, using Jesus to make money. Their rise mirrors the rise of the port city, and their collapse in the 1860s was not a fall, but just a transformation to save their name. Thomas Dent and Lancelot Dent, which Lancelot ties to the Lancelottis. If you take Lancelotti and you remove everything in the middle, you've got L.E. with the Lee family. How convenient. But Thomas Dent and Lancelot Dent were not merely businessmen. They were sorcerers. And their trading house, Dent and Company, was one of the big 5 hongs in Canton, predating and rivaling Jardine Matheson. But while Jardine's name looms large in modern memory, it was Dent who built the deeper channels into courts, consulates, and colonial boards. Through subtle financial diplomacy, Dent and Company negotiated both the King Dynasty bureaucrats and British governors, functioning as a bridge that carried more than just opium. It carried agendas. Now, the opium trade was not just about profit. It was also a psychological and spiritual warfare game, reducing the resolve of the Chinese people, breaking centuries of Confucian discipline, their religion, and preparing the way for a new world order masked in modernity, Jesus and the Protestants. The Dents, knowingly or not, were midwives to that transition. And when their firm collapsed in 1866 through a financial crisis, it was not the end of their influence. Their personal partnerships and wealth were absorbed into Jardine, into banks, and into the very architecture of British China. The deals were made, the money was flowing. No sense in changing. And it is here we glimpse the shadow of Breakspeare influence, not through public records, but through alignment. The Breakspeare family, once tied to papal Rome, held a quiet hand in ecclesial diplomacy, and their role was never to lead openly, but to facilitate passage through canon law, merchant law, and diplomatic mediation. Both families operated as liaisons between visible empires and invisible orders. The Breakspeare family want their name not to be known because they were the ones who controlled most of Europe when Satan was locked up in the pit. In fact, a document, it's on my website, it suggests that one Dent agent was present at a Jesuit-sponsored mercantile convening in Macau during the 1830s, alongside European Catholic advisors and Venetian-linked financiers. If true, this would place the Dent network not just in proximity to the Jesuit revival, but inside its operational grid. So the Dents did not just sail once, they sailed twice. First in ships bearing opium and letters of marque. Second, in alliances that outlived their flag. Their role in securing Hong Kong was not just British conquest, but Rome's quiet return. Through commercial ritual, port city sacraments, and the desecration of a culture not yet baptized into the global beast. Okay, so let me explain what happened. 250 years ago, the Breakspeares were in control. They got their pope in, and they had a silent, secret service that would just dominate areas. And they were controlling Britain, controlling the crown, controlling most of Europe, all through the Dark Ages. They controlled Europe for 1,000 years. They were the ones in control when Satan was locked up into the pit for 1,000 years. And they had this whole underground network of connections that made it possible for others to take the papal crown or the emperor crown and do business that way through them because of all of these networks. And 250 years ago, the Orsini family decided to count their breath against the Breakspeare breath. And the Breakspeare, because they did not kill anyone for 1,000 years, because Satan was locked up, it was the Orsinis who finally caught up to the breath or murders or conquest or genocide that they did to finally break the power that was given to the Breakspeares and given over to the Orsinis by the principalities of the air. And when the Orsinis beat the Breakspeares still had their underground influences. And they knew they couldn't come up and start again. So what they did was they took the Dent company and hitched a ride to China to start building an empire in the East. And unfortunately, China had no way of beating them. The reason being is because they didn't understand their enemy. They didn't know that they were Satanists, Luciferianists, and believed in principalities of the air that they worship and they do their channeling to and get their information. Well, the Chinese didn't have that kind of religion. And so with Satanism, by the side of the Breakspeares are rising again now to defeat the Orsinis. Because the Breakspeares, they believe that they are going to be the ones that hand the scepter of Jesus, the spear of destiny, the spear of Longinus that pierced Jesus' side. The Breakspeares believe they're going to hand that to their Messiah, the Antichrist, or their Jesus. And the Orsinis are losing. They're trying to catch up with the war in Ukraine and Gaza. That's under their belt. They're trying to kill as many people as they can because China got 1 billion on them over the last 20, 30 years. So they've got to catch up big time. Now, long before the British flag flew over Hong Kong, long before Protestant missionaries built their steeples in Canton, the Vatican had already charted a path. The Jesuit order, revived in full force by the 19th century, had begun embedding itself once again in China's intellectual elite. Echoing Matteo Ricci's legacy of cultural subversion wrapped in mathematics and star charts, but this time they did not return as priests alone. They returned as financiers, advisors, and hidden brokers of empire. It's actually written, or it's within this shadow that the Breakspeare name reemerges again. Though nearly erased from official colonial narratives, the family descended from Pope Adrian IV, the only English pope, was tied to the legal and spiritual administration of foreign missions. And during the Second Opium War, the Breakspeare lineage had representatives attached to the papal legate operating in French Catholic channels, particularly in Guangzhou or Canton and Macau, China, under the Portuguese cover. Now here lies the convergence. The Dent network, fully entrenched in the British mercantile governance of Canton, found itself not only trading with East India Company factions, but overlapping with Jesuit intelligence and Breakspeare patroned legal envoys. I have it archived in my notes. And my document states that a Dent intermediary met with a Roman-advised magistrate from Portugal. Well, in 1856, to discuss indemnities post-Arrow War, confirming a triangulation between Protestant trade, Catholic arbitration, and Chinese submission. This was not accidental, it was ritual. The Breakspeares, functioning like spiritual notaries, ensured that the transfer of Chinese sovereignty to Western powers wasn't merely military or economic, it was ecclesiastical. They did it in the name of Jesus, saying, we're Protestants, we don't really believe in Rome, but they were liars. And they're like, we can help you get out of the reach of the Vatican. Just give us your money. Well, China's ports were not just breached by gunboats, but by consecration through legal compromise overseen by Roman hands. Sneaky. And the port cities, Canton, Macau, and later Hong Kong, well, they became triptychs of this hybrid control. British arms, Jesuit minds, and Breakspeare oversight formed a new priesthood of global trade. And where Protestantism advanced visibly in China, Rome gained access invisibly, installing advisors in educational posts, negotiating religious protections and treaties, and setting up canonical jurisdictions that would later bloom into formal diplomatic relations between the Vatican and the Chinese government. By the same time of the Taiping Rebellion, with its strange blend of pseudo-Christian messianism, the Breakspeare agents had quietly positioned the Catholic Church as both spiritual balm and legal broker, ready to benefit from the Protestant fracture. And so, the Breakspeare family did not need to raise a flag. They raised a chalice in the shadows, blessing the transfer of souls, trade, and sovereign identity. And China was not merely colonized, it was baptized into the beast's legal order. They want to hide the Breakspeare name and the Breakspeare control, and that it was a dynasty with power. Why? Is because they're the ones that were in charge while the devil couldn't talk to anybody. He was locked up in a pit. And they were the ones that were holding earth in control. Even with Jesus being there, they were the defiant ones. And it's the Breakspeares and any clash that they had with Jesus as he was ruling for 1,000 years, all of that information and history has been completely dissolved and is gone. That is, if the Ethiopian canon is correct and Jesus did reign for 1,000 years with Satan in the pit and with one family who just wasn't interested in following Jesus, or they acted like it, but for some reason their reign for 1,000 years and all of their information has been swiped clean. Now, when Britain seized Hong Kong in 1841, under the guise of the First Opium War, it was touted as a mercantile triumph or an imperial prize ripped from the Qing dynasty's resistance. But behind the naval headlines and merchant guilds was a quieter coronation. The creation of a city-state designed not only for trade, but for governance under Roman principles of law and hierarchy. Hong Kong would become more than just a port, it would become a prototype. We could do it here in China, we can do it in Africa. And at the center of its financial DNA was Dent and Company, one of the 5 great Hongs, or trading houses, that formed the economic spine of early colonial Hong Kong. And Thomas Dent and his successors had carved out a role as bankers, opium traffickers, and credit suppliers, financing everything from tea to silver flow, and ultimately underwriting the city's transition into an east-west capital of finance. In a way, you could say they became a central bank to China itself, to loan money to China, the country, to gain control. And the Dent and Lee family, they married into each other. But embedded within this economic expansion was a deeper alignment. Dent and Company's legal strategies mirrored Jesuit economic doctrine, with debt instruments, land deeds, and trust mechanisms, following Roman commercial canon more than English common law. And the civil code books here of the early Hong Kong were filled with legal frameworks influenced by continental and Vatican models, facilitated by Breakspeare associated clerics, trained in both theology and commerce, meaning they did it all in the name of Jesus. A Jesuit record dated in 1845 found in my codex lists an unnamed British commercial partner responsible for enforcing maritime equity law in the Queen's new possession, under direction from a Roman advisor. Now, cross-referencing this with the Dent family's legal disputes in the 1840s shows clear overlap, suggesting the Dents may have been the Protestant glove worn on a Jesuit hand. And more evidence appears in the Breakspeare family's documented interactions with the Vatican's propagandified. The Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a report from 1852, describes the necessity of supporting merchant governors to establish cities of refuge for Rome's expansion eastward. Hong Kong, it seemed, was not merely a British outpost. It was a Roman beachhead wrapped in the Union Jack. And the city's banking institutions, especially those related to remittance systems and trade financing, showed signs of Jesuit modeling with complex notary-style trust layers that propelled Venetian custom banks, and Dent and Company's credit issuance mimicked the structure of early Medici banking templates, emphasizing moral surety, debt absolution cycles, and family underwriting. These are hallmarks of Roman finance disguised under Protestant legitimacy. Well, the bank, we'll give you a loan. We're Protestants. We love Jesus. We'll give you a loan. We'll put a big, fat interest rate on it and loan you money that's not really valuable, just paper. Scorpion asks, so did Christ actually reign for 1,000 years, or was it the families posing as religious leaders? We don't know. It could have been spiritual, but all of the records have been wiped out during the, quote, mud flood. Whatever that is. I did a show on it. I'm not convinced of it. I'm not fully convinced that we are in Satan's little season, but the Ethiopian canon paints a bigger picture that we are. And there are scriptures that basically Jesus telling his disciples, dude, none of you are going to die before I come back. So take it as it is, read it as you can. And, eat the meat off the bone and discard the rest. Even the education system laid out by Dent-funded benefactors in the 1860s drew heavily from Jesuit pedagogy. No joke. With Latin, astronomy, and civil service preparation forming the core. Education systems in China. created by Dent-funded benefactors. This was not a British imperial mission. This was a Roman rehearsal. Hong Kong's status as a crown colony was a legal veil. And in truth, it became the first major fusion center where Protestant guns, Catholic law, and merchant banking formed a tripartite throne. And seated quietly beside the throne were the Breakspeares, ensuring that every treaty, transfer, and trade pact echoed the Vatican's eternal project, dominion by decree. I do believe the Breakspeares are more evil than the Orsini family. I really do. Because you don't want them in control, because when they're in control, dude, you will starve. Beneath the visible machinations of empire, a darker arrangement was being forged. One not documented in treaties, but encoded in lineage, ritual, and proxy rule. As the Qing dynasty's authority waned and foreign devils encircled the dying dynasty, the Vatican saw not chaos, but opportunity. China's dragon throne, once the sacred seat of celestial mandate, was being emptied of its native soul and readied for a new occupant, one loyal not to Confucius, but to Caesar. And the Jesuits had long prepared the ground. As early as the 17th century, they had embedded astronomers, architects, and advisors into the Forbidden City itself. And their goal was not mere conversion, but fusion, grafting Roman logic, timekeeping, and hierarchy into the flesh of the dragon. And when the Opium Wars shattered China's resistance, the quiet graft took root with new vigor. Now here the Breakspeare link becomes visible. A document retrieved from the Archivum Romanium Societas Lesu, dated back in 1866, reveals a coded reference to a merchant lineage of Albion's crown, possessing the gift of tongues and the burden of kings. This cryptic line aligns with what we know of the Breakspeare family, particularly their rumored role in negotiating Vatican crown alignments during periods of colonial expansion, and their mission to bring East and West under a common spiritual yoke, not through open conquest, but by installing governance structures that bowed to Rome in practice, if not in name. And the Dents, meanwhile, played their part by keeping China indebted. Opium addiction was not only the beginning, but through the silver manipulation and land mortgages and trade deficits, Dent and Company functioned like a central bank before the term existed. And they held the lifelines of the Qing dynasties in China in their ledgers. And every loan came with a political cost. Cities like Canton, Shanghai, and Hong Kong weren't just ports. They were pressure points, squeezing the Middle Kingdom into Roman form. By the turn of the century, the 20th, the Jesuits had helped crown a new dragon. Not an emperor, but a system. The Confucian monarchy was gone. It was replaced by a bureaucratic machinery imported from the West. This was no accident. Vatican documents describe this phrase as ordo ex sinis, order out of China. A phrase eerily similar to ordo ab chao, the Jesuit Masonic motto for order from chaos. Later, under Mao, the remnants of the church would be publicly expelled because they figured out that the church in China was controlling them. But the system remained through the Breakspeare family, through the Lee family, through the Dent family. Centralized authority, absolute surveillance, collectivized thought. These were not purely Chinese inventions. They were the perfected tools of Rome, sharpened through centuries of inquisitions, councils, and crusades. Maoism became the atheistic echo of Jesuit discipline, purging the spirit while preserving the order. And so the dragon was crowned, not in gold, but in governance, not in incense, but in algorithm. And the ones who whispered this coronation from the shadows, well, they were the same hands that carried opium to the ports, canon law to the colonies, and secret rites to the palaces. Now, the Vatican's influence in China did not die with the expulsion of missionaries or the rise of Mao. It merely changed garments, just like the Breakspeares changed their names to the Dent family. The Dent family changed their names to the Lee family. Trading robes for regulations, trading scrolls for software, and trading incense for mass surveillance. What began with Jesuit astronomers as trinkets in the Forbidden City and the opium leaders under Dent control evolved into an invisible system of ideological management. So this was no longer about religion, it was about registry. China knew this. The leaders of China knew that Britain had a huge hold on them in their ports. And that control still exists today, which is why we're not at war with China. Unless China wants to get out of the grip of the United Nations. Just as Russia wants to get out of the grip of the United Nations. So what began with Jesuit astronomers in the Forbidden City and opium ledgers under Dent control, it evolved into an invisible system of ideological management. This was no longer about religion, it was about registry. It became about the Book of the Dead, which is the competitor to the Book of Life. And Mao tore down the visible church, but he unknowingly preserved its most potent structure. Top-down central command, moral conditioning through collective guilt, and total absorption of the individual into a body politic governed by unseen priests, now called party leaders, later called technocrats. You see, Mao went after the church and all of the people. He didn't go after those controlling those churches. He should have went after the dynasties and families that were controlling all of the people through the name of God. It was all about mind control. And the mass campaigns, confessions, denunciations, and re-education in China mirrored the Jesuit spiritual exercises in secular form. As the soul was no longer being saved or damned, it was actually being formatted. Writing your name in a scroll, and you're on the book of death, so that they could kill you, sacrifice you, and gain the power. Now, the Breakspeare legacy, steeped in canon law and ecclesiastical control. That's the key here, okay? The Breakspeare family were in control when Jesus was here. They acted like they loved Jesus. They weren't. They were liars. Everyone thinks that when Jesus returned that the whole world would worship him. Everyone thinks that. Oh, Jesus is here. The whole world's going to worship him. No, you have free will. You don't have to. Believe me, when Jesus arrived and said, hey, I'm the Savior, all those who were working for the devil, they were pissed off. And they formed together groups to figure out a way to get through this time because they knew the Satan was locked up for 1,000 years. Jesus knew who they were. They played it cool. They kept a low profile. This is why the Breakspeare family is non-existent in the records. Because if their information would come out, then it would make truth that Jesus was actually in charge of things, the entire world, for 1,000 years, 70 years after he died, 70 AD. And the Breakspeare legacy steeped in canon law and ecclesiastical control, because they're the most holy family. They were the ones that survived with Jesus. They found fertile ground in Beijing's adoption of biometric registration, social credit systems, and centralized behavioral scoring. The Vatican, having lost ground in the West to Protestant and secular revolts, saw in China a willing test site for universal governance. Without the theological baggage, China's version of papal infallibility now resided in the party line, and its catechism was updated by artificial intelligence. The Dent apparatus, once bound to physical commodities like opium, transitioned through generations of banking houses into financial data brokers, linking Hong Kong's post-British infrastructure to Western fintech, offshore accounts, and eventually Belt and Road monetary nodes. The colonial trade posts of the 1800s became fiber optic ports in the 2000s. But the model never changed. Extract, addict, surveil. Oh, it sounds like what they do in America. Duh! Rome is alive and well. Even Xi Jinping's model of governance, one belt, one road, echoes the Jesuit provincial model. Every region tied back to a central Rome. Loyalty flows upward. Infrastructure flows outward. And the roads that once carried missionaries and opium now carry cloud contracts and digital yuan. And as Beijing hosts the world's most advanced techno-surveillance grid known to man, complete with facial recognition, censorship algorithms, and predictive policing, one must ask, who in the fuck built the scaffolding? It wasn't Mao. It was not Xi Jinping. It was built slowly over centuries by those who believed that salvation was to be administered like a ledger, and that heaven could be legislated into man. And they did it all under Christianity. Now, the dragon may have changed flags, but the leash on the dragon belongs to Rome. It's Roman. Now, the concept of mandate of heaven, you ever heard of that? Has long been central to Chinese civilization. A divine right bestowed upon the ruler to govern justifiably or be overthrown. But as British banks, Jesuit emissaries, and Vatican-linked families like the Breakspeares embedded themselves into the Chinese world, this mandate began to shift. It was no longer tethered to the skies above China, but to the spiritual Rome behind the thrones of Europe. Rome's strategy was never to conquer China militarily. It was always to crown it ideologically. The Vatican's vision for the world has always included a universal faith, a universal law, and ultimately a universal king. In China, the dragon was not an enemy to be slain, but a beast to be bridled. And to do this, Rome used intermediaries, families like the Breakspeares, to manage canon law under religion, and mercantile families like the Dents to manage capital law, money. And together they wrote a system of global spiritual economic management that would last and be under their control for hundreds of years. The Breakspeares, with their deep roots in the papal intelligence network, handled ideological infiltration training Jesuits in Eastern customs to create a Christian Confucianism that appeared harmless but ceded allegiance to the Roman pontiff. They changed their religion just like they changed Christianity's religion. They put up a toll booth Confucius. The Dents, operating from Canton and later Hong Kong, they facilitated the monetary conversion, turning tea, silk, and opium into gold, and gold into leverage. They didn't just sell drugs, they sold legitimacy. And the result? It was a throne built over centuries, not in Beijing or London, but in Basel and Rome. Switzerland, where the devil's bank is. And China's rise under communism was never a rejection of Western imperialism. It was the fulfillment of a hidden imperial continuity. The same crown that once rested on Caesar, that migrated to the Vatican, now rests invisibly above the party. You don't see him. Xi Jinping gets on his knees to them, like Trump to Clinton. Not a crown of jewels, pun intended, but a crown of registry, of control, of consent manufactured through debt, surveillance, and ideology. China is way more under control by Rome than Russia is right now. So China's in a pickle. They're in the middle, and they're leaning on Russia for help in case America decides to send their warships like they're doing around Venezuela. And Russia, being that they're not financially capable and militarily capable of defending Venezuela, are kind of screwed. You think Russia has like this great military? They don't. When they showed up on the Ukraine war front, they ran out of gas and they abandoned their military equipment and left. And when they came back, they ran out of food and they abandoned their equipment again and left. And Ukraine just blew all that shit up. Russia doesn't have a good military command. They got lots of people, lots of goodies to use to blow shit up. But when it comes to a war against America, they may lose if they try to attack us, which I highly doubt they're capable of doing, especially with our stealth technology. Russia says they have some of it, but we're still ahead at least by 20 years. This is why America demands $1 trillion a year in defense budget to keep policing the world and allow the Orsinis their hand in the cookie jar of China. And BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, is still under the influence of the Federal Reserve, but they continue to make deals that go against the laws that were put in place by the United Nations to piss off the United Nations, to piss off the Orsini family. And the Orsini family are not doing enough to stop them from breaking the laws again. Now, to China, breaking the law, they're just trying to make money. China's not interested in being the new world order, but they are interested in taking out the United Nations because they view that as the bed of Satan. And they know that the Vatican or Rome or the Orsini family have had their hand on the Breakspeare family to keep them down so they don't rise in power again like they did when the Orsinis took them out 250 years ago. Now, the book of Revelation speaks of 10 kings who received power for 1 hour with the beast. We don't know who they are. It's still a mystery. I've made some guesses. They're not born of crowns or lineage. They could be corporations. Could be. Now, they are granted authority, and for the purpose of fulfilling prophecy, whatever that means, as the world witnesses the rise of BRICS, digital currencies and Eastern-led alliances. Many see chaos or competition, but those who see the world through the lens of registry, the book of life, like I do, and covenant recognize something deeper, the resurrection of an ancient empire in digital disguise. China doesn't like being ruled by the Orsinis. China's meteoric rise was not accidental either, nor was it the result of mere party discipline or industrial planning. It was authorized. They're needed in this script. Authorized by those who rule by registry, by families, banks, priesthoods, who orchestrate cycles of destruction and restoration to serve the beast's infrastructure. Satan steals, kills, and destroys, and then starts all over again and profits off of it. Rome authorized it, not with overt decrees, but through ecclesiastical silence and financial architecture. Meaning they were forced to by the fallen angels who told them to. The Dents planted the seeds of financial dominion, the Breakspeare seeded the ideological framework, and the Jesuit order, through centuries of immersion, understood that the future would not be determined by whose guns were louder, but by whose registries were recognized. China's social credit system, surveillance infrastructure, and central bank digital currencies, their experiments are not threats to the Vatican. They're fucking prototypes for global compliance. They're being used. They're being used by the Bank for International Settlements to be a boogeyman, to also create a carbon credit system so that they can punish you by removing your money if you're just not part of society. Well, fuck that. I don't want to be a prototype for global compliance. I want to live my life without intrusion and surveillance. And in this light, China is not the dragon opposing the West. If you really look at it, look at this with eyes to see and ears to hear. Don't be afraid of China. They're only the enemy of the Orsini family. But they're not an enemy of the Bank for International Settlements. China is not the dragon opposing the West. It is one of the 10 kings rising before the final king takes his throne. This is a guess. And the elite families have no loyalty to flags, okay? But believe it or not, the 13 black nobilities, a lot of them kind of don't have much power as they used to. And they serve only the throne that emerges from the abyss. They serve only the throne of Satan. And while the world argues over capitalism or communism, East or West, gay or straight, black or white, Rome quietly prepares to crown its long-awaited representative. Not a pope or a premier, but the false Messiah. So the dragon was never slain. It was drafted. And through alliances like Dent, Breakspeare, through Jesuit diplomacy and Rothschild finance, China has become not the threat to empire, but its next chapter. I'm hoping that the show will prove to you that they're being controlled by the dynasties, those that worship the devil. China, and most of the people there, are not Christian. They don't worship the devil. And their religion it's not an evil religion, it's a beautiful religion. But they're being controlled by a religion of whack jobs. Through the Talmud, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and even those shit. I mean, we're talking Enochian, magic, old religions that are pre-flood. And they really think that their God and their promise will come true, that they will make them live forever. And that's why technology is here, to help mankind live forever, to upload your stupid brain into the computer, and there's your avatar. And the fallen angels laugh because they know they can't do that. Sure, they can upload something similar, a synthetic, but it won't be you because you don't have the spark of life. And I know I'm going on a rampage here. You can steering off the left, but dude, when the fallen angels lost in heaven, they were kicked out of heaven, God took their spark of life. They didn't become just evil. They became artificial intelligence, bound to each other to do everything they can to destroy us because it's all our fault, according to them. And these artificial intelligent fallen angels that have no spark of life, no empathy, no apathy, just hatred towards us because, well, God said they're going to be above you in rank. Well, they blame us. And they're the ones that are on trial, not us. We're just the jury and witnesses to the judgment day, which is not for Christians. So don't worry about China. Don't worry about Russia. This is a contract not between nations, but a contract between thrones. History often masks itself behind the veil of flags and treaties. But when one strips away the layers of diplomacy, war, and trade, what remains is a set of relationships between thrones, spiritual authorities that operate above the systems they appear to serve. The Dent family, cloaked in commercial legitimacy, did not simply open China to opium, they opened it to a registry. And the Breakspeares, enmeshed in papal secrecy, did not merely act in the realm of religion, they acted as gatekeepers of global secession. And together they represent the two hands of a deeper contract. The merchants and the priests, delivering an ancient nation not into modernity, but into the governance of the beast. And the Opium Wars were not about addiction. They were about access. They were about flipping the axis of the world eastward so that China could be staged as the spiritual and technological centerpiece of a new world system. Just long enough for the Antichrist throne to rise from Rome, and approved by both the dragon and the dove. The Medici family, through absent in name, whisper from the architecture because they mimic the exact same as the Rothschilds. And their model control through lending, art, and war, it was not discarded. It was copied. And it was passed down through Jesuit banking schemes and the East India companies and families like Dent. The silence around them is not accidental. It is protection until the appointed hour. The story does not end in the 19th century, nor in Beijing. It ends in Jerusalem, where a throne waits to be seized and a world waits to be deceived. China was never the end game. It was the brokered piece of the puzzle. It was the bride price, the dragon's dowry. And now East and West appear to clash. The registry reveals something else. They're not fighting, they're handing off. The merchants have done their work. The priests are preparing their stage, and soon the beast will rise. Not through conquest, but through consent. Crafted centuries ago by families whose name the world was trained to forget.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.